Welcome, freaks, to the inaugural episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks. I know what you're probably thinking, which is I did not think there would ever be a podcast devoted to both Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks. And here we are. I'm one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and yeah, we are going to go along for a crazy, epic B-movie thrill ride. I'm reporting from Brooklyn, New York, one of the, freak capitals of the world. I'm not too far from Coney Island. And who is taking this joyous ride with me?
Well, my name is Steve Guntley. I'm very happy to be here. I'm reporting in from the second freak capital of the world, Austin, Texas. And this is the podcast that's all about mouth leeches, sexy psychics, and spiky eyeballs. In other words, this is a podcast about full moon features.
I just imagine a needle drop or a record scratch right there where someone's like, a podcast just about full moon features. Well, you're in luck because it isn't just full moon features. I mean, we will be hitting everything in the full moon oeuvre, but we will also be hitting everything in the Charles Bandiverse. So if it's a Charles Band produced movie, if it's an Empire International Pictures or Full Moon, or, even something maybe from time to time that just feels like a kindred spirit to a full moon movie. We'll be talking about anything from this canon. We will be exploring the darkest depths of B-movie horror, and we will be evaluating all things from the houses that Charles Band built.
I'm very excited to start digging in this. We've been kind of talking about doing this for a while, I think, because we are both deep cut horror nerds, I think, and it doesn't really get much more deep cut than full moon features. Like this is kind of the bastard stepchild of the whole horror subgenre, but it's also a really important piece of filmmaking history, just because this is one of the premier direct-to-video film labels. Like this is one of the biggest ones. I think we should probably talk a little bit about our personal history with Full Moon and with this whole wild and wacky subgenre of films. I mean, for me, we're both roughly around the same age, like late 30s, early 40s. So like we grew up in the video store era, like the prime video store era. And one of my fondest memories as a kid was anytime my mom would go grocery shopping, there was a little video section in our grocery store that used to be a thing. And she would just like let me go wander around in the video store section while she was doing all the grocery shopping. That way I stayed out of the way. And it gave me an opportunity to basically memorize every VHS box in the entire store. And I was particularly fascinated by the horror section because A, I was afraid to watch these, and B, I was not allowed to watch these. So there was something very forbidden fruit and enticing about these. So I would glean the little bits of horror and gore from the little thumbnail images on the backs of these boxes. And there was always just like at least a dozen different full moon features. So, I would see Puppet Master, or I would see Doll Man, or little things like that. Demonic Toys always freaked me out. Like the cover art of Demonic Toys freaked me out. And like it was years before I actually got around to sitting down and watching some of these. But I also became aware, like I didn't even know this was part of the canon, but kids used to talk about Castle Freak on the playground. Like there was always that one weird kid whose parents would allow him to watch whatever he wanted, and this kid rented and watched Castle Freak and told us.
Yeah, you're sitting across from him, my friend.
Yes, you're the one. You were the one purveying the smut to everybody. And like I, for the longest time, did not believe that some of the things that this kid was telling me about Castle Freak actually happened in that movie. And then I watched it years and years later. I'm like, oh shit, yeah. He bites a woman's vagina off in that. Okay, that's fun. So it was just it just all became part of this whole crazy lore that really just stuck in my head, and I was always fascinated to check him out. And that's why I'm excited to be doing this show, because there's still a ton of these I have not seen. I've seen a decent amount of them, but there are a lot of these that have never crossed my radar. So I'm excited to dig into it. How about you? What's your history with these?
So in a lot of ways, it's really similar to yours. Full Moon was a company I wasn't so familiar with by name necessarily, but definitely by some of the properties. I grew up in the 80s also. I went to the video store. We had a mom and pop video store that was right down the block from where I lived in Queens. We had a bigger video store, the corporate video store that we would go to. And I had a weird thing where I became enamored with horror almost instantaneously after two things that happened. One was I was forbidden to watch Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, when it first came out on VHS.
Okay.
Because I was staying at my friend's house and his older sister had a slumber party. And they rented Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. And they said, you're not allowed to watch this. You can't watch movies like this. And my friend and I found a way to kind of sneak into a place in the house where we could watch through a creak in a door on an angle. And if you know anything about Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, there are a lot of boobies in that one.
Yeah.
So that was very formative. And I was like, oh man, this is a whole world of stuff I don't know anything about that I can't wait to find out more. About the same time, maybe a year later or so, was when Dream Warriors was coming out on home video. And the mom and pop video store that was down the block from me had a life-size cardboard standee of Freddy Krueger. And there was like a cardboard tent next to it with a bunch of VHSs of Dream Warriors as a new release. And I remember saying, I need to get this. I don't know what this is. I need to see this. I need to know more about this. And my parents let me rent the movie sort of under the guise of like, we're going to try this out. And if you're scared of it, no. But if not, what's the harm?
But Freddy was such like a pop cultural favorite. Like younger people don't realize like that Freddy was kind of like candy to a kid. Like, which is a horrible thing to say for a child murderer, but like he was kind of like this movie character that all
don't
the kids
accept
watch.
Candy from Freddy. If you take anything from this episode. But I rented it. I fell immediately in love with it. I immediately became obsessed with Freddy and all things Freddy, to the point where the following summer, part 4 was coming out in the theater. And I was in like second grade or something like that at this time, second or third grade. And my mom let my cousin take me unsupervised to the movies to see part 4 in the theater. And you would have thought that I was seeing, like I was at a David Bowie concert or something. Like I was enamored, like I was seeing the world's biggest rock star on the movie screen. And it was crazy. And really from that moment on, I just became that person. I went to the video store and we had a weird deal worked out where my mom would let me rent 2 movies, except one of them had to be like a kid's movie. So I would leave the video store with like a horror movie, and then the other thing would be like a VHS of a half-hour Peanut special, or a VHS of the old, Filmation Adventures of Batman and Robin cartoon.
Oh God!
Or the Archies, or Josie and the Pussycats, or some other Hanna-Barbera thing. And that was my thing. I would go to the video store. I almost said I would get an adult movie. That's not accurate.
Yeah.
But I would get a movie that was just meant for adults.
Yeah.
Right. And a movie that was meant for kids. And then when I really liked something, I'd do the old double VCR hookup, and I'd record the movie. And then I would have my own personal copy of it, and I could fit a couple movies if I recorded them on SLP. And my friends would come over, and now we're getting into like 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. And I still had a lot of friends who had really protective parents. And they would come over, and I would, we'd be like, all right, well, they're going to stay over. We're going to watch TV. And I'd wait till my parents went to sleep, and then I'd put on Dream Warriors, or I'd put on A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'd put on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 at age 12, with a bunch of other 12-year-olds. And
this is an invaluable service when you're like an elementary school kid.
And so my
friends
of us
who did not have access to these.
Right. My friends would go home, and then they would tell their parents, and then my mom would get angry phone calls, and it was a big thing. But that never, you go through phases in your life where there's things that are in the foreground or the forefront of what you really love to do. And I went through phases of where this stuff was really up front, and then it was sort of in the back of my brain, but it's always been there. And really, I'd say over the last 10 years especially, I sort of went, no, you know what? Like, this is me. This is a big part of my personality. Like, this needs to be front and center in a lot of ways. And so I went back to collecting movie scores and soundtracks and posters, and not a ton of physical media in other regards, but I just really embraced it. Tons of shirts. I'm actually wearing a Castle Freak t-shirt right now.
Can attest.
Which,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that it's just been part of my life. So it's in some ways a very similar upbringing to yours in relationship to horror and full moon and exploitation. Same thing. I would walk through the video store, look at the cover art, judge based on the cover art if I thought that this was worthy of taking home. Sometimes I took something home that was utterly terrible. Other times it was a hidden treasure that I maybe would have never found.
Yeah.
And so I just really appreciate having been alive during a time when I was able to walk the aisles of the video store and peruse based on cover art, because I would buy things that looked cool. And speaking of buying things that looked cool, Steve, a lot of people bought the VHS of the movie we're going to talk about today.
They sure did. All right, so a little bit about the format of this show and kind of what we're doing here. Basically, each week we are going to watch a different full moon feature or a different Empire feature, just one of these connected movies from this whole huge universe. We've randomized most of the list, but with a couple of exceptions. We've curated these first couple of episodes to give sort of an introduction, give sort of our thesis statement for what we're trying to accomplish here. And we're also going to try and keep the series in order. Like, we're not going to, watch every single movie in a series in order, but we are going to keep them chronological as much as we can. As for the rest, we'll just kind of randomize it and dig in deep and find some weird little hidden treasure from either the full moon or the Empire or the moonbeam or all these different little sub-labels that full moon has. And we both felt that there's really no better way to start talking about this whole weird little enterprise than with Puppet Master. Puppet Master is the first full moon feature officially. It's also one of the most successful. It's definitely the one with the longest franchise. 11 movies in this franchise, which I did not realize it was quite that many. But
I think it's more when you count the offshoots and the spin-offs. It's like the full mooniverse is vast.
Yeah, so it's like 13 or 14. It's way up there. And it just feels like this is the movie that's really going to demonstrate everything that we're looking to talk about on this show. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit. I wanted to start off by giving a little bit of history, just for if you're coming into this cold and you don't know what the hell we're talking about, you just assumed that we had handsome voices and wanted to listen, and you're not wrong. But yeah, we wanted to give a little bit of history about what we're getting into here. So I think easily the most important figure that we're going to talk about on this show is a guy named Charles Band. Charles Band, he was born in 1951 in Los Angeles. He's the son of a filmmaker named Albert Band, who's also going to come up a lot on this show because Charlie and his dad worked together quite a bit. He was a filmmaker. He's got this really crazy life. So two of the texts that we're going to be drawing from the most heavily on this show, one of them is a companion piece, a full moon companion piece called It Came from the Video Aisle, which is a really great, really in-depth deep dive into everything full moon. And the other is Charles Band's autobiography, which is called Confessions of a Puppet Master. I just started reading it this week. I'm only about 30 pages from the end of it. This book is a fantastic, funny, fast-paced, really entertaining read. He's got amazing stories from all these different elements. You feel like he's withholding a lot of stories too. So there's potentially a whole other volume that he could go into here. But this book was published in 2021. It's a really great read if you want to dig into it. And it gives you a good idea of who Charles Band is. He's a very charismatic, very upbeat and positive, and also just kind of a shady guy by his own admission. He's not above a little double dealing, a little creative filmmaking, so to speak. But always he seems like he comes from a good place, and it seems like a decent sort of guy. He was born to the son of a filmmaker, and so he kind of grew up in this world. He spent a lot of his youth in Italy, where his father was filming a lot of those low-rent Hercules movies in the 60s and 70s, and he just developed a real love of filmmaking. In the 70s, he started taking on production roles and started producing his own films. His first significant hit was a movie called Tourist Trap, which is directed by David Schmoller, who we'll be talking about again pretty soon here. That's from 1979. And that movie was successful enough that it started leading to a couple of other low-budget projects. Another significant one was 1982's Parasite, which was the debut film of Demi Moore. And when Band was trying to shop around a potential sequel to Parasite, he came up with the idea of just forming his own distribution company, and that is how Empire Films was born. Now, Empire Films was going to specialize in quick and dirty theatrical releases, like something that kind of flies under the radar. You could turn it around in like 2 or 3 weeks and make a profit off of it. The first kind of demonstrator of this concept was a movie called Ghoulies, which I believe came out in 1985.
I believe 85, yeah. And you've seen the cover art for Ghoulies. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, Ghoulies, what's that like? If you are between the ages of 35 and 50, you've seen the cover of Ghoulies.
It's a couple of gross little puppety monsters crawling out of a toilet. It's a very striking image, and it's a definite power stance. You know, it's telling everyone what exactly this movie is. You know, and look, Ghoulies is a pretty blatant Gremlins knockoff. There were a lot of Gremlins knockoffs after 1984, you know, because you could make these like small little puppets and get them into mischief. So we would get hobgoblins and elves and munchies and things like that. But Ghoulies was one of the early ones that really hit. It cost next to nothing to make, and it made $35 million at the box office in the 80s, which is pretty astounding. And so with that, basically, Empire Films had the runway to start making a whole bunch of movies, and a lot of them were really big hits. One of them is like a genuine, like critically acclaimed horror classic. That's Stuart Gordon's Reanimator from 1986, which is like legitimately one of the greatest horror movies ever made. But, you know, so he was cranking along throughout the 80s. He was doing really, really well, so well that he was able to buy Dino De Laurentiis' old movie studio in Rome, which I believe at the time was the largest film studio in the world. They used to film old, like, biblical epics there, you know, so they had these massive, massive sound stages. So Charles Band bought it, turned it into Empire Pictures. And then a couple years after that, by 1988, 87, profits were starting to dwindle. Debts were starting to accrue, and Charles Band kind of got screwed out of the studio by an old family friend who basically just kind of snatched it out from under him. But Charles Band, to his credit, is a guy who does not sit around and wallow in his defeats. He kept on plugging away, and he took a couple of the projects that he had salvaged from that failed Empire deal and started pitching them to Paramount. He found a kindred spirit at Paramount in the young studio executive who liked his moxie and put him in charge of their new direct-to-home video label, which is going to specialize in like quick, cheap horror movies or like exploitation films that you could put directly on a film shelf without having to go through all the rigmarole of theatrical distribution. And the first movie released under this new label, which Band called Full Moon Features, was Puppet Master.
So Puppet Master was released October 12th, 1989, straight to video. Again, they were thinking kind of like how you described the model for Empire, this kind of like low down, quick and dirty theatrical releases. That was what they originally planned to do for Puppet Master. Instead, they scrapped that and went straight to video. And this thing was a success.
Huge hit
on video. This was a huge hit on video, and this was one that I remember seeing the box for. I assume I rented it. I couldn't tell you what the first time was that I saw this movie. It wasn't one that stood out to me in the 89, 90, 91 sort of range, but I definitely knew it by reputation, I would say, by a few years later. So I maybe didn't see it until the mid-90s. But I also think that it ran on cable because I feel like this was a movie that I definitely saw skimming, you know, Showtime and Cinemax in the early 90s and, you know, trying to find any sort of deviant art that I could that was on there. Because that's another thing, too. There's a lot of crossover from stuff that was straight to video to then stuff that was kind of straight to cable or went quickly from video to cable. I feel like it's all very incestuous in a way.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of these titles were things like movies that we're going to talk about in the future.
Yeah.
Because Full Moon, you know, became this studio that was putting out B movies, direct-to-home video, cranking movies out. I mean, just one after the other, to the point where they needed to branch out and, have different divisions that they then end up with Torchlight and Moonbeam, which are like the adult friendly and kid friendly versions of Full Moon features. And from, I believe, Torchlight, a film will cover, God, who knows, sometime in the next few years called Beach Babes from Beyond, which was a huge Cinemax movie. I remember flipping through the channels and looking at the channel guide and saying, Beach Babes from Beyond. Oh, and there's nudity. Oh, this is a movie I have to watch.
Oh, I mean, that's one of the movies that helped kind of give that network their moniker Skinemax. It's like kind of the soft core sort of fairly harmless but audacious kind of exploitation film. And these were all like big profitable hits. Eventually the relationship with Paramount would kind of break down, but Full Moon has not stopped, and they're still going. They're still releasing about a movie a month to this day, and that's a pretty crazy turnaround. Like Charles Band really prides himself on, you think of an idea and then a month later it's a movie that's on shelves. Like they have these incredibly quick turnarounds. And so a lot of these movies we're going to get are pretty cheap looking because they are very cheap. And extremely silly, but also extremely topical. Band talks in his book a lot about how exploitation, the label makes you think it's about like exploiting somebody, but really it's about exploiting a moment. It's about exploiting the zeitgeist. And that's why a lot of his movies are operating on current fears, current anxieties, or current events, and so one of the things that was kind of popular around the late 80s, thanks to the Chucky movies, was killer dolls, killer puppets. And so there are so many killer doll and killer puppet movies that are coming out of Full Moon. And some of these are just because Band, by his own admission, pitches the same ideas because he forgets that he already made this movie.
And we're going to talk about a cool baker's dozen of them at least.
At least, yeah.
And I meant like outside of Puppet Masters proper.
Yeah.
Also.
Oh yeah. No, it keeps going beyond that. Like, I think my first exposure to this movie. Tell me if you remember this because I'm already blanking on the name of this disc. But in the pre-YouTube days, they would sell you DVDs that were kind of like horror movie compilations, kind of like greatest hit sort of things, where you could see like clips from like a dozen different horror movies, and it would show you like the best kills and things like that. And sometimes they would have bonus features. I think this one had commentary from Robert Englund, like on all of them, even the non-Freddy movies. And they showed the scene from this movie, the elevator attack scene from the end of the film, where Gallagher is being beset upon by all the different puppets at the same time. And so that was my first exposure to this movie. Like I'd seen, like you, I'd seen it on the shelves, of course, and it's a very distinctive one because this has a lot of really cool designs for their creatures. Like you get Blade, who's like this very gaunt-looking puppet with a trench coat and a knife hand and a hook hand, and Pinhead, who's got like a human-sized hands and then a tiny little head. Like these are really cool and memorable character designs.
They're all, how should I say this? They're all unique and memorable in their own way.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool because I think once you get into this sort of like tiny terrors, we'll call them, of like your gremlins, your ghoulies, your munchies, your hobgoblins, and now your puppets, it would be really easy to have sort of a bunch of things kind of cut from the same mold. But I think what I like about the design of the puppets in Puppet Master is that they're all so unique and different from one another. Like there's no mistaking Blade, especially since, so we mentioned David Smoller, who's the director of this movie. He also worked a little bit rewriting this script. One thing that shouldn't shock anyone who's seen this movie is that the script went through numerous rewrites, including while the movie was being made. And David Schmoller added some things to it, and one of the things that he did was, I don't think the puppet of Blade was as descript as it ends up being in the movie, but he, a few years back, had made a movie for Charles Band called Crawl Space,
yes,
where he directed Klaus Kinski, which
This
was
story is
allegedly
insane.
a nightmare, which resulted in them coming to physical blows, and Klaus Kinski, I think it was Klaus Kinski, threatening to kill David Schmoller, or was it the other way around?
No, it was Kinski holding a knife to Schmoller's neck, and Charles Band had to come in and talk him down. And this will not surprise anyone who knows anything about Klaus Kinski and the way he works, and the fact
He's
that
very cool and normal and rational.
the man was literally insane. Like not in a Hollywood way, like in a this man should be locked up forever kind of way.
And so the puppet design of Blade was changed by David Smoller to resemble Klaus Kinski.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's
So when you look
amazing.
at that gaunt face and the straggly whitish hair, it's all there. And maybe, the
Wow.
blade on Blade's hand is reminiscent of the blade that Klaus Kinski held up to David Smoller when he was threatening to murder him.
And Schmoller, we should mention, is he's a Texas boy, and he kind of came up working. I think he was a crew member on the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that's how he kind of came to Band's attention. He directed Tourist Trap for him, which was kind of his first big hit, and he was also like, he loves Charles Band, and Charles Band loves him, but he's also the first one to say like, Charlie, your script is stupid. This idea is stupid. I don't like this movie. And to this day, he does not like the movie Puppet Master, which he directed and rewrote a significant amount of. What do you think about this movie? Like, I mean, it's a popular movie, and it's definitely an important movie in terms of what this studio is trying to accomplish. But is this a go-to movie for you?
Okay, so I'm going to start first by saying I think the DVDs you were describing before, now maybe I'm wrong, but were they the Boogeyman series?
I think so, something like that.
Yeah, because those were DVDs of horror compilations that were just sort of like greatest hits with some talking heads,
Yeah,
giving
something
some
like
behind
that.
the scenes stuff. So if it wasn't those, it was probably something similar, which I'm sure like that scene is a pretty memorable scene. I wouldn't put it past it for it to be on one of those. So the plot of this movie is that there's a bunch of psychics who find themselves going against a former colleague of theirs who has pulled them all into this location of the Bodega Bay Inn.
Which is a Hitchcock reference. That's where The Birds took place.
Yes. And so they get there, and he's sort of getting revenge by having all of these super cool puppets do different things to all of these people. And somehow this starts with Nazis.
Yeah, okay, so this is something like I have only seen this first Puppet Master movie, but I do know Nazi imagery becomes a big part of this franchise going forward.
Yeah.
In this one, it appears that Andre Toulon, the titular puppet master, is being persecuted by the Nazis. I don't know if that. I think that continues. I'm not sure, but I think the Nazis are trying to use his abilities. Like he's gained the ability to bring these puppets to life through some kind of Egyptian magic. And I think it's interesting, this opening scene, because I think we're being asked to sympathize with these puppets a lot, like to a point where we're like, yeah, they are very kind of sweet, sympathetic characters, despite having knife hands and everything like that. Like, it's only later that they're kind of used for evil. But yeah, Andre Toulon is played by William Hickey, who is the you know him from Prizzi's Honor and Nightmare Before Christmas, things like that. Like a very distinctive, gravelly voiced old man.
Academy Award nominee.
Yeah,
William Hickey from
Yeah.
like 3 years after his Academy Award nomination, here he is making this movie. And I want to go back to your question, Steve, about how I feel about the movie. I think that this is a pretty effective movie. I think it's flawed, but I think it's effective. And you were talking before about how these are cheap movies in general, and this was. I mean, this was a $400,000 budget movie, which even in 1989 standards is a very low budget movie.
Oh yeah.
And but I think that there's a lot of character here. I think there's a vision. I think everyone involved in this sort of understood that we're going to play the humans particularly, we're going to play this a certain way. I think everyone sort of knew when it was time to sit back and really let the puppets take center stage, because that's what this movie is about. I mean, that's why you're taking this off the shelf of the video store, is because you want to see the design of these puppets. You want to see how they move. You want to see the effects. You want to see, you know, how they're going to kill people in creative ways. And I think, like, for a cheapo movie from 1989, there's some really fun practical puppet effects and stop motion. And I think we haven't really talked about the puppets themselves, except for a couple of them, like Pinhead and Blade. But, you know, one of the puppets is Leech Woman. And
very distinctly gross puppet creation here. Yeah.
And I think the Leech Woman, well, I should say scenes, plural, but the first scene in the bed with the man tied up is really disgusting.
Yeah. I mean, there is a bit of a, because these puppets look so cool and the cover art looks so cool, there is a little bit of a when are they going to get to the fireworks factory kind of vibe to this movie. Like, I don't know that I care about any of the human characters, or really the whole psychic subplot thing going on here. Like, David Schmoller pitched his idea as kind of like a Big Chill with killer puppets, you know? So it's a reunion for a funeral of a bunch of people with these special psychic abilities. And I like that each one kind of has a different variety of psychic ability.
Yeah, I mean, these are, you know, this is a B movie. So there's going to be your sort of B movie problems with, be it production, performance, you know, pacing, whatever it might be. But I do like the fact that they seem to have at least made an attempt to give you character types and give you enough sort of unique detail that the people aren't interchangeable. And I like that about it. I'm not saying that they're completely fleshed out three-dimensional characters in any way, but you can tell the difference between the people. And I appreciate for that, because I'm going to take this moment to sort of just say to our listeners, who, in case anyone who is listening is a huge Puppet Master fan, is a huge Full Moon Features fan, we're not here to just point out, you know, the problems with these movies and shit all over them and rake them across the fire or anything like that. I kind of look at these movies like they're TC Tuggers. You know what I mean? Like, these movies are maybe superfluous, a little weird, a little unnecessary, but you know what? They exist, and you don't make fun of them. You don't watch them ironically.
They're not a joke.
They're not a joke movie. And I just want our listeners to know that like, we are sincerely doing this. Now, we are going to obviously...
Oh yeah, no, it's coming from a place of real affection. Like, whether we're not going to love all of these movies, but we feel a great deal of affection towards the concepts behind these movies and like why they exist.
Yeah, and there's a lot going for Puppet Master, for it being such a, you know, grade B or grade Z kind of straight to video. I mean, it was shot on film, we should say. It wasn't shot on videotape. I mean, you can look at it and this thing doesn't look like Sledgehammer or Things. I mean, this looks like a movie, and I'll talk more about in a second specifically the type of movie I feel like this movie looks like. But I'm sort of impressed, as thin as the characters themselves might be. I am impressed with the way they were able to pull not just actors who are known for other things, but the fact that I think it says a lot for Charles Band, the fact that a lot of people from his early movies and from Empire came back to work with him again in this venture. And so you have a lot of these sort of Full Moon stable of people, Empire stable of people like Schmoller and others who are doing the work. It was all very familial with everything going on. And, you know, you have Irene Miracle playing Dana the Psychic. And, you know, she was best known to people as the woman who pressed her boob against the glass in Midnight Express in
Right.
the much parodied, "Oh Billy" scene
And-
from the Cable Guy.
And our lead here is Paul Le Mat, who is probably the biggest name in this movie at the time. People may not remember who he is now, but he was the star of American Graffiti, and he was like the runner-up choice for Han Solo before Harrison Ford came in. Like at one point, this man was going to be Han Solo, and now he is in Puppet Master with, I'm going to just say, the worst head of hair I've ever seen in my life. Maybe it's him or the Doctor in this movie. There's a couple of really unfortunate male haircuts in this movie.
He is really close to an Anton Chigurh.
Yes,
And-
yes,
and it's-
but like
it's
a
not
receding
great.
hairline, Anton Chigurh. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a good look.
He strikes me as a less tall Angus Scrimm.
Yeah.
In some ways.
totally. He plays
Yeah.
a good game, boy. Yeah.
Yeah, he does. But yeah, I mean, he was, like you said, runner-up for Han Solo. And I also just love the fact that, again, as some loyalty to Charles Band, you get the amazing Barbara Crampton as Woman at Carnival.
Like, okay, that's a good performance. Like her and the actor playing her fiance in that scene are quite funny and like really deadpan and kind of underplay everything. But I think this movie really comes to life with the puppets. I think that's something it really delivers on. You have this really, actually pretty amazing stop motion effects from a guy named Dave Allen, who unfortunately would die a few years after this from cancer. But he's a recent Academy Award winner. He worked on the special effects for Young Sherlock Holmes. And Charles Band is obsessed with stop motion animation, and so he always insists on getting it whenever he can. And the stop motion shots in this look fluid and like really effective, And then you get some goofy stuff, of course, like when they're working with actual puppets and you can almost see the people off screen, like working the hands and everything like that. But that's just kind of part of the charm. And each one of these puppets is distinctive and gross in their own weird way. So let me break down the 5 puppets that we get here. We have
Do it up. Let's do it.
Blade, of course, is the signature puppet of the entire franchise. He's going to get his own spin-off movie, like I think last year that came out or something really recently.
Very recent.
He's like the star monster of this whole franchise, and he's the Klaus Kinski one. Then we have Pinhead, who is a guy with a big body and a little head, who's kind of the muscle. You get Jester, who seems to be kind of like this persistent... I don't really know Jester's deal other than his rotating face. And I'm excited to kind of dig into the lore a little bit because those 3 that I just mentioned, Blade, Pinhead, and Jester, are the only ones that are in every single movie. Then we get Leech Woman, who we mentioned before, who looks like a sexy woman who can regurgitate leeches onto people's body, as most sexy women can. And who's our last one here? Tunneler is our last one, who was always my favorite when I was looking at the VHS box as a kid because he's got a drill for a head, pretty self-explanatory what his thing is, but it's a pretty cool little crop, and we're going to expand on the stable of puppets as we go.
Sure, and I should say that I love the design of Tunneler also, and one of the things I love about the sort of introduction of both Leech Woman and Tunneler is that they're working together.
Yeah.
It's sort of like I expected them to break into that Garbage Pail Kids the movie song about how important it is to work together. But it's great because what I really like about that is that I think they recognize that they had sort of power in numbers. Like there's a lot of puppets. We want to give them all a chance to do something. The people are coupled up. It's so much more fun to have the man and the woman dismembered by 2 separate puppets. Like I love the fact that she's drilled by Tunneler while looking in the bed. And I will say, for a B movie, pretty good looking blood.
It is. Yeah, it's pretty gross.
And then his Leech Woman scene is just so memorable and so disgusting. And you said the word charm before, and I think you really nailed it. I think there's such a charm, to me at least, for practical effects. And it's like, I mean, the cool thing about this is looking at the leeches come out of Leech Woman's mouth is that you don't look at the puppet and wince because it's a puppet. It's supposed to be a puppet.
Yeah.
So even if like you can tell that they're switching puppets for different scenes and that this one's design has its mouth open and this one's has its mouth closed, that doesn't matter because you're looking at essentially inanimate objects anyway.
Yeah.
And so they don't have to, there's times in movies where they flip from a person to an effect and it's really chintzy or cheap or obvious, but here it doesn't matter because you're looking at a puppet regardless.
I mean, the moments where you bump up against it are like when Irene Miracle is fighting Pinhead, and it's basically she's picking up a stuffed animal and throwing it across a room, and like, you can see that. It's just like, all right, but it also adds some limitations to the villains, which I think is also important, like to, they are very small and they need to kind of wait for the situation to be stealthy, to kind of break in, We mentioned sex psychics in our intro, and that's kind of where one of the hallmarks of a full moon feature is just lots of gore and lots of kind of casual nudity. And this movie delivers on that. There's a woman who she's I forget the term they said, but she gets a psychic charge from objects. Like she can touch an object and she can really feel like the emotional history left on it. And her powers seem to be mostly sex-based. Like she will sit on a bed and realize like which movie stars used to have sex on this bed, and it would make her all horny. And so it's just one of those things that we're going to be encountering over and over. And it's a ridiculous concept to kind of introduce, but it's all played in good fun. But and like I said, things escalate really nicely, and we get some nice puppet carnage by the end of the movie, which culminates in all of the puppets ganging up on kind of the big bad of the movie. And there's some stuff here that I'm still kind of like, it lost my attention a little bit when they're talking about like who this Gallagher guy is and like, is he dead? Is he not dead? And all this stuff with Egyptian curses, and he's using these puppets to do his evil bidding, and then they turn on him. Like, I wasn't super following that, and from what I understand of the rest of the franchise, it doesn't really matter from here on out because it's going to focus more on the puppets, right?
Yeah, I will say one thing is this movie is a little too overstuffed with the psychobabble and gobbledygook and all of these sort of exposition pieces of Egyptian curses and this and that, and it's a lot. It's like at the end of the day, this is a killer puppet movie, and so let's stay in our lane a bit. And I think this is no better illustrated than the early in this movie. There's a cut, and even though I do like this movie, there's a cut that makes me laugh out loud every single time, which is that the movie starts, and I want to give it credit for. Not that it does a ton of period detail, but I do feel like the 1939 stuff in the very beginning with Toulon, it looks good enough. Like it's exactly what it needs to be. But there's this whole cold open sequence of, Nazis coming to take over, and you go through that, and I feel like there's a fade to black. And it's like, okay, well, that's not how I expected this movie to open. All right, well, we got that out of our system. And then it cuts to Harvard University. And I just laugh every time because it's like, now we're going to Harvard University. And then we were introduced, to our main character, Paul Le Mat, as Alex. And it's like, okay, this movie is just getting to where we want it to be in a really circuitous route. Yeah. And it is overstuffed. And I will say, I have not seen a lot of these movies. I've seen a few of them.
Yeah.
And of the ones I've seen, this one is actually not my favorite of the series.
Right.
So there's going to be a sequel. When we get there, I'll say at the time, and you may even know because you may agree with me at that point, or we'll probably maybe even discuss it off mic. But I do think there's too much here because I think they were trying to have an element of this is a movie for adults. When very much, the cover art and what it really is in spirit is for kids. But I said before that this looks like a movie and a certain type of movie. aside from, your Ray Harryhausen and Phil Tippett and stuff like that, and David Allen stop motion stuff, which sort of looks one way, a lot of the stuff with the adults really struck me as reminding me of Italian horror movies, of which I'm a big fan. And I really love giallos and all kinds of Italian horror movies. It's one of my favorite subgenres of horror, to be quite honest. And this movie was shot by Sergio Salvati, and he worked with Charles Band multiple times, to my understanding. I think through Empire and some Full Moon stuff. And he was sort of known for having worked with Lucio Fulci.
Yeah.
And he shot Zombie, and he shot the entire Gates of Hell trilogy, which is City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, and The House by the Cemetery.
Yeah.
And I get that sense watching that. There's sort of a slickness to the scenes with the adults in this, or with the people, I should say, when it's not an effect. And I like that about this movie. And I think, again, maybe I'm sort of a broken record in some ways, but for a movie that's this cheap about killer puppets that's released straight to video, it's pretty competently made in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah. No, this isn't like you're exactly right. It's not incompetent. It's made by professionals, and it's got a lot of stuff to really like about it. I really like the setting of this kind of like ramshackle old hotel that does not actually exist. It's not there. But they have this great kind of multi-layered hotel that you can explore. And I think there's a whole lot to like about this movie. This is the second time I've seen this before, just like watching it for this episode, and I liked it more this time than I did the first time. I think I was a little bored by it the first time, but like the puppets really clicked with me this time. And the fact that like we are being asked to sympathize with the puppets to a certain degree, like they are quite literally puppets. They are being controlled by whoever wants to control them. So they are fairly innocent in and of themselves, despite what gross purposes they may be designed for. It's kind of all about who's controlling them, the evil people behind the scenes. So you do get to sympathize with these little creatures a little bit. And I think something about that makes them a little bit more lovable, in the same way that we eventually found like Freddy and Jason to be lovable, quote unquote, in their own ways as pop culture figures, And I think that's kind of the key to making us care about these puppets going forward.
I did have a Freddy Krueger stuffed animal like pillow doll, so like he was lovable. Some kids had Hulk Hogan, and
child molester.
Exactly.
He's going to invade your dreams?
Yeah,
again, I think it's still so bizarre to me that was such a huge pop cultural moment.
I actually still have the. It came out between Dream Warriors and the Dream Master. They put out a Nightmare on Elm Street sticker book, and the book has its pages with like printed, like screen printed on the pages is like these background images of stuff from the movies, and then there's spots where there's a little caption saying like, "Here's where Glenn meets his demise in the bed," and then right above it would be like sticker 81 and sticker 82, and you would buy packs and put them on, and then the picture would be there. And the best thing was that this was marketed at kids, but the pictures of the stickers were so graphic, literally just still frame shots from the movie. Like one of them is a picture of like Amanda Wyss laying on the bed with her nightie open with the 4 slashes down her stomach, or her being dragged across the ceiling and across the wall. And it's like, this stuff was really marketed towards children. Like I had that. I had the Freddy glove.
Yeah.
The toy glove. I had, like I said, a stuffed animal talking Freddy doll.
Freddy was a staple on MTV. Like he was always introducing music videos, and I feel like to kind of bring it back to the competence that you mentioned in Puppet Master, I feel like that's sort of the thing that sets Full Moon aside from something like Troma, which I think would probably be its closest like comparison company. With Troma, I feel like they are reveling in the fact that their movies are bad. They're reveling in the fact that these movies are tasteless and gross and like incompetently made and silly and stupid. And they're fun. They're fun movies for that regard. But I feel like Full Moon they're not setting out to be bad. They're not setting out to be terrible. They're kind of just not too worried about it. You know, they know they're in their lane and they know what kind of movies they're making. They're not going to try and make actual willful trash. Although I think we're going to kind of devolve into that later in Full Moon, where we're getting the Ginger Dead Mans and the Evil Bongs and things like that, which we will cover in detail. But yeah.
We will be taking a trip to Franchise Town.
We will.
Many, many times in this, and I'm just going to come right out now and say it. There are a couple of Full Moon features franchises and Empire franchises wherein I sort of feel like the first movie is actually pretty good.
Sure.
And this is kind of one of them. I think if you ask me to rate Puppet Master on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give this, you know, for what it is and what I'm looking for, I would give this is probably somewhere like a hard 7 for me in like I like this well enough and I get enjoyment from certain things. I don't think it's a great movie. It's not a stone cold classic. It's not a masterpiece. There are problems and flaws with it, but it's watchable. It's competently made. And it's like surprisingly clever and surprisingly workmanlike for something that was churned out so quickly and cheaply.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a couple of franchises coming up. Now, I'm not counting Evil Bong and Ginger Dead Man in that when I say that.
We might love those.
We might. We very well might.
We might love them.
But there are a couple of franchises, name franchises of things that are, you know, that are sort of like the big titles for Empire and Full Moon, where I'm going to come to the defense of some of them that they're actually pretty good straight-to-video movies.
Yeah. No, there are going to be quite a few in here that I think that I'm really looking forward to. And I'm kind of in the same page. I'm like a 6.5 or 7 out of 10 for the first Puppet Master. And like, it's flawed. It's got some pacing issues, but it's made me excited to see where this series is going. Like, I want to get a little bit more puppet carnage going on and see the roster expand and see some stuff like that. So I'm excited to dig into it. And we're going to get to all of them over time. And but I think for now, what are we looking forward to next week? I think we're going to be jumping into a different film, a different era of this development that is kind of important for what we're talking about. I think we wanted to talk about an Empire film next.
Right. We're going to jump back to an Empire film. We're going to talk about sort of the early collaboration between Charlie Band and the great Tim Thomerson. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk next week about the original Trancers from 1984, I believe, is super limited theatrical release, mostly known as, I think, an early 85 video release.
Yeah. One of the movies that Charles Band is most proud of. And he actually directed this one. And I know, like, Quentin Tarantino is a big fan of this movie. Like, this one has a lot of, like, crossover appeal. And I'm excited to talk about it. I have not seen it. So I'm excited to talk about this one. And this is another one that is going to kick off a long franchise. But I feel like this is a good opportunity to look at some of the early success. And then after that, we'll look at one of the later franchises in the Full Moon to kind of see the full scope of where this whole franchise is going. But I'm really excited to dig into all of these. We really are both genuine castle freaks in the sense, and puppet. Or are you more of a puppet master, or are you more of an evil ball?
Nobody listens to anything I say, so I'm definitely not a puppet master.
I'm sorry. What?
I'm trying to think what. Yeah. Seriously, I'm trying to think which. Like if there were a franchise, I'm not a Killer Bimbo. Although that's not a franchise, I think, but we will hit Assault of the Killer Bimbos sometime soon. I'm not a Cannibal Woman in the Avocado Jungle of Death, although we will definitely hit that one a little bit later on for sure.
You are a bit of a sorority babe in the Slimeball Bolorama.
Oh,
that
I
is
would
a franchise. There are two of those.
You know what? I was just going to say, if you go by the first movie alone, I agree with you. There's a second one of those, which I have never seen, so looking forward to it.
That came out like last year, like a very recent sequel to that movie.
Yeah.
So we're going to be digging into all of these, and it's going to get gross, it's going to get weird, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, listeners, thank you so much for embarking on this crazy. I don't even know what to call it. Just sort of ride, odyssey through this B movie treasure and trash trove that is Full Moon Features, and Empire International Pictures and anything Charlie Band. We hope that you have enjoyed listening to this episode. If you have, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any of the new episodes that drop. And we will be we're looking for people to sort of reach out to us. Also, you can find me on Instagram at _cowboy_Jerry. And you can send me a message and let me know what you thought of the episode, what you think of Full Moon Features, if we left something out, if you disagree with something we said, because I think we were pretty agreeable in this episode. I think the further in this we get, we'll probably butt heads a little bit, and I think we'll bring different perspectives to the microphone. But if you have any thoughts about Full Moon Features or anything that you want to let us know about, you can reach out and find us on our social media.
Yeah, you could find me on Instagram at Minotaur Matador. And feel free to reach out. And also, if you're watching these movies along with us, a lot of these are available on free streaming services like Tubi and Freevee and things like that. So they're pretty accessible. I think there were for a while, there was like an Amazon channel of like Full Moon Features where all of them were streaming. So all of these are available in digital streaming formats. You might need to dig a little bit for some of them, but most are available for free. So watch along with us and feel free to send us your notes and comments and thoughts and feelings and vibes and all of that. So.
All right, listeners, we will see you next week as we visit 1984 Tim Thomerson and a young Helen Hunt in Trancers.
See you then. Ooh.